Hey, what's up? This is Matt Harvey from Exhumed and Gruesome. You're watching RichardMetalFan, so turn it up, dude. Right.
What's up, guys? Episode 176 of Richard Metal Fan Interviews, calling from Zoom at my house, and I'm here with Matt Harvey from Exhumed and Gruesome. How you doing today, Matt? Great to be able to talk with you today.
I am. I'm doing well. Yeah, good to talk to you. Thank you again for being flexible and allowing me to reschedule. Yeah, I'm stoked, man.
It's all good, man. It's great to be able to talk with you. So, kind of like the format is, I want to do like a speed run of your discography and sort of like talk about like your musical history, but take you back to young Matt Harvey. So, kind of growing up in California, what were the first bands that got you into metal and what made you want to be a vocalist and guitarist?
Um, I think as far as getting into metal itself, I remember there was a kid in my school in sixth grade. We were on some sort of field trip, and he was a new kid. And he asked me, he's like, "So are you into metal? And or are you into heavy metal?" And I was like, "What's heavy metal?" And I remember he was like, "Oh, you fucking pussy," and then like didn't talk to me, and I was just really confused. Um, I just was like, "Hey, who is this kid?" Like, I play sports and do stuff. Like, I'm a cool kid or whatever. um, and I was like, "But seriously though, like, what is heavy metal?" And so this was like the end of '86, I guess, going into 1987. And at that time, MTV was really big. So you'd hear like Cinderella, like their first album was hitting, and like I think that the first Poison and stuff like that, and the Ozzy Randy Rhodes live tribute album and stuff like that. So yeah, then I did the whole like record club. You get 12 tapes for a penny thing. And the last one that I listened to of the 12 was Master of Puppets by Metallica, and that was the one that sort of everything clicked, and I was like, wait a second. And so that was really the start, and before that it was like Maiden maybe, and Ozzy, Priest, Twisted Sister. And then yeah, I heard Metallica and sort of everything changed. I was like 11 at the time. And yeah, then it just kept getting sort of heavier and faster. And then a couple years later, I heard the Peel sessions by Napalm Death, and then that was, it was just about sort of finding the heaviest, like fastest music that you could. Um, in terms of wanting to be a vocalist, when I was a kid, I didn't really want to be a vocalist. I just wanted to be a guitar player. I didn't really want to like play solos or anything either. I just wanted to like write songs and write riffs and stuff. Um, but yeah, and I thought doing backup vocals was kind of cool or whatever. But it just sort of became evident, trying to play with people as a kid, 14, 15, 16 years old. People weren't playing the kind of solos that I liked. So I was like, well, shit, I guess I have to learn how to play solos. And then, Exhumed had started by the time I was like 15. And but we
Yeah.
were playing shows by the time I was like 16, 17. And after a few lineup changes over a couple of years, I kind of realized that if I was going to be the main guy staying in the band the whole time, that I should move from doing just the backing vocals to being one of the main vocalists, because then that way it would be consistent.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of how that happened.
Yeah, yeah, because y'all formed in 1990, I believe.
Yeah, we played our first show in like towards like the end of '91. I mean, 90 is maybe being a little generous because I mean it was like, more like a bunch of like 14, 15, 16-year olds just sitting around being like, our band is going to be called this and we're going to do such and this and that, and not so much actually like, writing songs and rehearsing and performing like things that a band does. It was more just like kids talking about a band. But then eventually then the talk became real. So yeah, somewhere in the 90-91 range, is when we started. But we played our first show in October of '91.
Yeah. And tell me about like some of those early demos, like the self-titled Dissecting the Casseted Omnitium and Exerting Innards. I think those demos are very raw sounding. I think where were those recorded at?
We used to use a studio in Palo Alto. There was a guy named Bart Thurber, and we were all really impressed because I think he had recorded the Neurosis demo that got them signed to Alternative Tentacles, which was like a huge thing. And he was doing like Plutocracy and bands like that were happening in the Bay Area around the same time as us. Um, and so we did all the early stuff with Bart, and but we also, those two recordings I think were done in like 2 days. So we set up, record everything, finish recording everything the next day, and be mixed, and then that'd be the end. So it was like, between how inexperienced we were and how little time we spent, everything that we did back then was super, excuse me, super raw, super underproduced, super just kind of a roll of the dice, because we weren't really like disciplined musicians, So it was kind of like if we were having a good day, then it might be a pretty good recording, and if we weren't having a good day, then it might be a bit shit. So
Yeah. Yeah, and one other demo I like is the Grotesque Putrefied Brains demo. Mo, I love that. Hard to believe that that EP is now 30 years old. So tell me about the thought process going into that.
I want to say that was the last thing we recorded when I was in high school. It was either right as I was about to graduate or just after I graduated high school. No, I think we did that before I graduated. Um, it was just kind of at that point we were just kind of trying to get confident as far as like writing songs, and we had a lot of ideas. We were really young kids, but we were just trying to figure out, I guess, what our sound was going to be, and what our approach was going to be, and we're just sort of further refining it. And that was really kind of all that stuff up until like I think the Horrific Expulsion of Gore demo was the first demo where we kind of had a direction, other than like, dude, make it fucking brutal. That was about it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we lucked onto some good stuff, and sometimes we kind of flubbed, and um, but we were definitely, there was a lot of growth and a lot of experimentation, and just trying to figure out what we were doing, and what we were good at, and trying to lean into that.
Yeah. And kind of going into 1995, you joined up with Newthgrush and you did the Kashik demo and Embraced by the Anti-Self EP. Tell me about Newthgrush because I don't think nobody's ever talked about that.
Not in the metal scene very much. Newthgrush was a sludge band, kind of like Grief, and they were much more involved with like the punk, hardcore kind of power violence scene. And basically, it was kind of like our original drummer Cole was dating Chio, the drummer for Newthgrush at the time, and Cole and I were like best friends since seventh grade or whatever. So we were pretty inseparable. So I ended up spending time around the Newthgrush folks, and they need another guitar player, an additional guitar player. And Cole's like, "Why don't you do it?" And I was like, "Sure." So it was just more like, oh, my friend's girlfriend's band needs a guitar player. And then when their relationship started to go south, I left the band. But it was fun, like we played a lot of cool shows. Like we played with Man as a Bastard and Spaz and No Less, and all of those bands. So it was fun to kind of be involved in that scene. And kind of irritate everybody in that, well, not everybody, but irritate a lot of the kids in that scene by being just like an unironic metalhead and showing up to like these punk shows and just wearing like a Iron Maiden Somewhere in Time shirt, and people are like, what the fuck, who the fuck listens to Iron Maiden? I was like, me.
Yeah.
But it was cool, we made some cool tunes, and it was a good time.
Yeah. And kind of going into 1998, eventually Exhumed got signed to Relapse. So how did Relapse find Exhumed?
It's kind of a circuitous route, really. We did a split CD with Hemdale in '95 on the drummer from Hemdale's label, Visceral Productions. Um, and basically, Visceral was kind of growing. Relapse ended up purchasing the label. Like Visceral put out like the first Nile EP, and they'd done an Incantation thing, and obviously Hemdale and some other stuff. And all we really had with Visceral was just like a handshake deal. But Relapse acquiring the company, they kind of had the option to sign us. And thankfully, one of the guys that worked there, who was actually roommates with the label owner, was a big fan of the EPs and stuff that we're putting out, and so that kind of helped put a bug in their ear, and they're like, "Yeah, cool," you know. So they just offered us whatever shitty deal, and we took it, and you know, 25 years later, here we are.
Yeah,
So
with
it's
gore
pretty cool.
metal, and this year does mark 25 years of the debut album. So curious is what was the thought process going into making gore metal? And do you have like a different feeling about the album now as to when you first put it out 25 years ago?
Uh, I definitely have a different feeling about it. I think the thought process was really disjointed because we were always kind of writing back then. I mean, that's why we did a bunch of different split EPs and a bunch of different demos and stuff. Um, and I think that, you know, Cole and Ross and I, who were the nucleus of the band at that time, we all kind of thought we were making a different record. And when it came out, you know, we brought in Mike Beams when after we had signed the deal and after all the music had been written for the album. But it was kind of written over time, you know, and I think that the, you know, the pressure of trying to make an album, you know, and our ideas about, you know, we're going to do this. Oh, no, we're going to do that, whatever. You know, it kind of came out, and I think all three of us were surprised, like, oh, like not in a pleasant way. We were just like, oh, I thought we were doing X, but I ended up with Y. And the other guy was like, I thought we were doing Z, but I ended up with Y. And there was a lot of just like internal tension between the three of us at that time. So it wasn't really like a pleasant experience or like a pleasant period of being in the bands or just life, really. So for a long time, I think I kind of hated the album. I mean, and obviously it's got some very crude production, which was not the intention either. But now I kind of look back on it with some fondness, and you know, I think there's a lot of good songs on it and stuff.
Yeah, like
That was never the
Necromaniac.
issue. It was just sort of
Yeah, it's a great
yeah. I
opening.
mean, you know, and it's we've been playing forever, you know. So the fact that the songs have stuck around for this long, you know, is a good indicator that there was something there. The fact that people are still asking us about it 25 years later is again, it's a good indicator. So now I feel a lot more fondness for that album than I did for a long time.
Yeah, and being as it now has been 25 years, is there a chance we can get a celebration somehow? Maybe do a tour or something where you play it start to finish?
Well, there are some plans in the works, and I don't want to just let the cat out of the bag, but there's going to be a bunch of announcements coming in the next couple months about that. Basically, you know, we were talking about doing some stuff, and then we had a couple of offers. We're going out with the Cavalera brothers in a couple of weeks to do their Morbid Devastation tour, and we felt that, you know, um, we wanted that tour to be its own thing and not really be caught up in the celebration of the back catalog, because we're going to be going out and playing, you know, in front of the Cavalera fans and, you know, people that might not be as familiar with us. And, you know, we're still really in the album cycle for To the Dead, which was our last record. So after that's done, there's going to be some stuff coming up, and we'll be announcing some things very soon.
All right, it's fair enough. So then going into 1999, you started up a Decapitator and you did their first release, We Will Destroy You, You Will Obey. And that's just very kind of thrash metal like. So how did the idea to start up that band come to be?
We started doing that in, like, I think we did the first 7 inch in, I want to say 97, like the winter of 97. Maybe it came out in 98. But it's something Cole and I had been doing for a while, you know, just kind of for fun. And I think, you know, because there was a lot of tension between Cole and Ross and I, like coming and going from all directions. Um, it was fun for just Cole and I to hang out and like just play music for fun with no real like ambition or whatever. um, and you know, during the '90s, like death metal obviously kind of took a big turn, you know, in the mid '90s, and that was kind of like our certainly my jumping off point as a fan was like, you know, 93, 94. Most of the bands that I really liked were really changing, and the scene was really changing, and black metal was getting really popular. And so instead of kind of trying to adapt into like the things that were getting big, like, all the groove metal stuff was happening, and like I said, black metal and these kind of more, I don't know, commercial or watered down kind of death metal albums were coming out. So instead of trying to adapt to that, I just decided to start going backwards. Um, and so I was looking for something with the energy that I was, of like the underground death metal stuff, and the and so I just went back and got, started listening to Exodus and Creator and Sodom and Razor and Infernal Majesty and Assassin, and like buying all these records, because they were really cheap. Nobody wanted records, and nobody wanted metal in like 94, 95, 96. So you could go to the record store and pick up, Venom LPs for like $4 or $5 at the most. And so we just really kind of, Cole and I, that was like our hobby, was just digging up all this old stuff from the 80s. And we loved it. And we started incorporating it into Exhumed, starting in 94, 95. And we wanted to do more of it. So we just started Decapitator as like kind of, just a fun thing, to just play this music that we were really excited about. And yeah.
All right, and then the next Exhumed album, Soldering Cult. I love this album because usually with the debut album, you have like your entire life to write, and there's a lot of hype with the first album. When it came to making Soldering Cult, did you felt like pressure to follow up gore metal?
I think we actually felt less pressure, because even with gore metal, like I said, that we kind of had a lot of conflicting views about what we wanted to do with the record. And then with Ross getting fired, you know, Cole and I were a little bit more on the same page, I think, creatively or whatever. And so, and Cole was also happier to kind of let me take the reins. So I felt less pressure, because I was like, hey, we're trying to do this. This is what we're going to do. And it's not going to be as, maybe collaborative, but it'll be more focused. And, we can kind of make sure that we do the record that we want. And we also had Mieszko Tolarczyk from NextGruesome producing. And so as soon as that was figured out, we really felt confident, because we loved, the NextGruesome records, and we were really good friends with him. So we knew that we were going to get a record much closer sonically to what we had in mind. And I think in terms of like trying to do something and then doing the thing we were trying to do, out of the first three, that's the record that stands out as the most successful to me.
Yeah, I especially love like the axe was made to grind, carnal epitaph, dinner and time in the morgue. I especially love like the back out with you guys with the blood and stuff. Like, how'd that come to be? I just think it's fucking badass.
We were just really leaning into, the sort of like Bathory, Manowar kind of, you know, really embracing all these sort of corny, or things that people would consider to be corny at the time, aspects of 80s metal. That's what we were trying to do. And we used to play with all these like spikes and bullets and shit. It was really hard to play, which is kind of why we stopped doing it, because you
Yeah.
got these like bullets on your forearm that are like cutting out your circulation, and then your spike gauntlet keeps coming down onto your picking hand and stuff.
Yeah.
But we were just really embracing all of that stuff. Like I said, Manowar, Priest, Bathory, Venom, Sodom. We were just leaning as hard into that as we could, while still playing, grinding death metal like always.
Yeah. And then next album is Anatomy is Destiny. And hard to believe this year does mark the 20-year anniversary of this. So what was the thought process going into making this album and sort of like the mind frame?
With that one, that was kind of like our attempt at, I don't know, like progressing musically or maturing a little bit, or trying to make a record, I think, that people wouldn't be able to slag off as a bunch of noise, because the first two records, got some, they enabled us to do a bunch of tours and got some press, and we went to Europe and Japan and stuff. But we wanted to, there was still people would be like, oh, you guys just do a bunch of bullshit, and there's a guy throwing up on stage and you wear all these spikes and just make noise and whatever. So I think we wanted to make a serious metal album, which is why we got Neil Kernon on board. And it was funny because I remember talking to him before that record, and we sent him the pre-production demos that we were working on, which is also new for us at the time. It was beyond just like a boombox in the jam room. And I remember him saying, like, I thought the last record would sound really good and really fit what you guys were doing, and I was curious why you would want to get me involved. And then I heard the demos, and I was like, oh, I see, because it's a little bit more musical, it's a little bit more developed. um I think that we didn't quite do what we were setting out to do. I think there's just a few kind of things, just musical decisions, I think, especially that I made, that are kind of amateurish on that album. But we definitely we wanted people to be like, hey, these guys are like kind of good at guitar, and like, look, they can do this stuff. And I think hopefully that achieved that, and there there's some good stuff on there as well.
Yeah, I agree. Agree. And then kind of going into the next thing, Garbage Days Re-Regurgitated, which is the cover album. What made you guys decide to do like a cover album? Because I know you actually covered like Metallica, even Led Zeppelin, even The Cure, which I thought was interesting. So how'd the idea of that come to be?
Well, basically, after we did the third record, Cole left because he had graduated college and he wanted to pursue his career in science, which he's still doing to this day, very successfully. And then Bud, our bass player at the time, who later came back on guitar, he left the band, just because I don't, he's a great musician and he loves playing music, but I don't think he cares about like being in a band, um, as a thing in and of itself. And so we were kind of struggling to like get a new lineup going. And we eventually ended up working with a Canadian drummer named Matt Connell and a guitar player, Wes Cayley, from Southern California. But it was like the lineup hadn't really like been road tested or whatever, hadn't really like come together. So I thought, we'd finish the contract with Relapse. We were kind of at a place where we could kind of just dilly dally a little bit. So I was like, well, let's see what happens, if we just do these covers, and then, hopefully the band will sort of coalesce from there. And of course it didn't, because we ended up splitting up like a year later or whatever. But it was just sort of a way to kind of like feel each other out and and also have fun, like adapting songs and trying to do some stuff that was, maybe a little unexpected and outside of what people thought that we would normally do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and then of course during like the breakup in 05, you did Anthony's and you did the Craze development demo in 2007. How'd you hook up with those guys?
those guys were just friends of mine from back when we were in high school, really. I mean, because all the music was recorded, in like 93, I think. And it was just sitting there with no vocals. And, they got tapped by a couple of friends of mine, or a couple of mutual friends who wanted to put it out. And they're like, well, we need some vocals. And so I got back in touch with the guys, to do it, and just was like, well, what are these songs about? Did they have lyrics? And they're like, well, they did, but we don't know where they are. All we have are the titles. And so I just kind of put together some lyrics and, went down to the studio one day and got it done. And that was it.
Yeah. And then I know that same year you did the second Decapitator album, The Storm Before the Calm. What was that whole like recording process like, being as there was like an 8-year gap between the last We Will Destroy, We Will Obey to that?
Um, you know, the writing process was cool because I think we had a lot of, you know, there was a lot more stuff that we could do that the second time around, just musically, more stuff that was taken from, not just like the early Metallica stuff, but Maiden and Priest and Diamond Head and Angel Witch and all of that kind of stuff, while still being this sort of like, you know, Sodom Creator, Exodus Razor sort of hybrid. But the recording, I don't know. We used like a buddy of ours, and we thought, oh, it'd be cool. We can just work on it a little bit here and there, and that it just the record took forever to make. And again, I think that it ended up suffering because of that. Like we should have gone to just like a regular studio and not try to be like, oh, our buddy will do it for cheaper and it'll be fun and this and that. So, but again, I think the songs, there's a lot of good songs on there, but I'm not a big fan of like the final product.
Yeah. And then, of course, 2008, you did like a split. We joined up with a Scarecrow and did a split with a Landmine Marathon. Tell me about like Scarecrow.
Scarecrow was like looking back on all the things I've done, that was always like the band that got away kind of thing. We had a really, really strong lineup. Our Bud from Exhumed was our guitar player. He's a fantastic guitar player. Will and Damien, who have been playing at Death Angel now for years. That was kind of the gig they went to after Scarecrow. They were just a great rhythm section. And we were a really tight band. Like we fucking rehearsed all the time. We gigged all the time. And in the San Francisco Bay Area, we were doing pretty fucking well for like an unsigned band. We were playing a couple shows a month and drawing, a couple hundred people. It really felt like something was happening there. And we had a couple of kind of false starts as far as like finding like a real label and doing a real thing. And after that went on for a couple of years, like I just lost focus because it just wasn't quite coming together, and I just had a lot of personal shit going on. So I ended up leaving the band, and the band kind of fizzled from there. But Will and Damien went on to be in Death Angel, where they're continuing to this day. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, it was just like a sort of classic Bay Area metal band, a la Metallica, Exodus, very influenced by again Diamond Head, Angel Witch, Priest, Maiden, and all that kind of Motorhead, Merciful Fate, that sort of early metal thing, but trying to update it into like a a muscular kind of like thrash, but like still rock band.
Yeah. And then kind of flash forward to 2011. I know before you did the reunion with Exhumed, you did the Grave Hill with When All Roads Lead to Hell. Tell me about that.
That was another thing where after Scarecrow had broken up and my 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 personal life was sort of in disarray, I ended up moving to Hawaii, and I was living there for a couple of years. And when I was getting ready to come back and work on All Guts No Glory, this was like when Facebook was just kind of starting, and people were like really into just like messaging each other on Facebook and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was just messaging with Rhett, the drummer for Gravehill, who I'd known for forever since he was in Morgion back when I was in high school. And I was just talking about coming back to California and this and that. And he's like, "Well, what are you doing? At whatever time it was?" And I was like, "I don't know. I'm just gonna be like." Literally, I'm fucking broke. I'm just gonna like move in with my dad and see what happens with my life, And so he's like, "Well, we're doing this tour if you want to go." And I was like, "Yeah, fuck it." That way, like, I'll come back to California and chill for a couple weeks, and then I won't have to start looking for work or whatever because I can go do this tour. And we had a good time on tour. They asked me to help them work on the record. And Exhumed was still kind of like putting the pieces back together to get going again. So, I had time to fuck around with it, and
Yeah.
it was a good time.
Yeah, and tell me about like All Guts No Glory. Were you kind of like nervous, like because there has like an 8 year gap between An Enemy Is Destiny and All Guts No Glory? Did you feel like nervous at all, or just like you just haven't lost a beat?
Um, I don't know if I'd say I was nervous, but I was just more, I was just trying to be open to whatever was going to happen. It was like working with Wes, who played guitar on Garbage Days. He was a really good songwriter. And I felt like we had really good songs. Leon and Danny, who'd played with us on the Anatomy is Destiny touring cycle, they were both really good players. So I felt like we could do a really good album. I just wasn't sure what was going to happen, and I was kind of like, well, Leon and Danny were not going to be permanent members of the band. That was kind of the understanding going into it. They're like, yeah, of course we want to do the record, but we have all this other shit. And so I kind of knew that. And knowing that, I was like, well, let's put out the record. We've committed to do X number of shows and festivals. We'll do that, and we'll see how it's going, And there's interest and if there's legs, then maybe we can sort of pivot. And I was living, I still live in San Luis Obispo County, and that's where Deeds of Flesh had been based forever. And their drummer, they hadn't played a show in years. Their drummer Mike, I'd known before, and he and I were already kind of hanging out. So I kind of had it in the back of my mind, like if this record kind of starts going someplace, Mike is a great drummer. We're friends already, and Deeds isn't playing any more shows, so he's kind of free. And so anyway, but really when we made the record, we just wanted to make a good record, and I didn't want it to be like a comeback thing or like a lot of bands, I feel like they kind of start to suck and then they come back and they're just okay, and people are like, oh, thank God, this record's great. And it's like, is it really great though? And so I wanted to make sure that the album like stood on its own and didn't felt like a band that was going to continue and was going to keep moving forward, not just kind of like repeating the same things over and over. So
Right. And then,
anyway, obviously, like it must have worked out okay.
yeah. Then, then of course, going into Necrocracy, I keep fucking up the title. And hard to believe this year is the 10-year anniversary of that. And this is, funny enough, was the album that got me into Exhumed. So what was the recording process like for this album?
Oh, cool. That one was a lot of fun. We did it like we basically used the same system for All Guts and Necrocracy, where we recorded the drums in outside of LA with John Haddad, who is a drummer and has a great live room for drums. And obviously, if you record drums with a drummer, he's going to catch more stuff. Just like when I work on other people's records, I'm a guitar player, so I hear guitar stuff, and I'm a singer, so I hear singing stuff. Drumming, I'm just like, okay, that was good, I guess. So John was a great person to record drums with. And then we went to Arizona to record with Ryan Butler. Ryan's a guitar player, so we did all the guitars with him. And I think we got a really, really good guitar tone on that album. And then we sent it out to Will Putney in New Jersey to get it mixed. But it was a real positive vibe, because we'd done a bunch of touring for All Guts No Glory, and we had brought Bud back on guitar. Again, like I said, Bud is one of the best guitar players I know, and just a lovely guy. So we had a lineup that was very road tested with Rob Babcock from Gravehill on bass and vocals. And we were like a band. We played a bunch of shows all the time. We were always working. We were always together. We were always doing things. And, we wanted to try and just make a record with a little bit more melody and a little bit more groove. And, that was Necrocracy.
All right. Kind of going into 2014, you also started up Gruesome. So how'd you get to know like Robin and everybody at the band?
I'd known Robin for a really long time. Robin is, deeply embedded in the industry, in the scene. She's done merch for everybody.
From Obituary.
When I met her,
stuff.
Well, she was doing merch for Cannibal Corpse when I met her, like 20 years ago, I guess, maybe a little bit more. But she's also, she plays in Decapitator now, but she played in Demonomancy and all these Sickness and all these various bands forever. And our drummer Gus actually kind of got Robin and Dan involved because he and I just were talking about it. And again, it was something that I thought it was going to be sort of like a goof, but it ended up having legs and just kind of taking on a life of its own,
Yeah, and tell me about Savage Land, because I love this album, and a lot of people say it's kind of like as if Death continued on after like Sound of Perseverance. So how do you feel about like the Death comparison?
I mean, it's a Death tribute band, so I mean, I hope if people don't make that comparison, then it's a complete failure.
Yeah. Except it's all like original songs.
Yeah, and so I think it was one of those things. I had gotten involved with the Death to All, the first tour, and done some shows, and then Gus was really close friends with Sean Reinert, and so he was teching with Sean on the a tour a couple of years later with Death to All, and that Exhumed ended up playing with Death to All and whatever. So we were all just hanging out, and Gus and I were talking about how cool it would be if they could do something with Terry and Rick or Terry and James or whatever, and focus on the earlier stuff. Hold on, let me plug in this computer real quick.
All right.
And shit, everything's running better today. Anyway, and we kind of just joked and said, well, if we can't make that happen with the Death to All camp, then maybe we should just like write our own songs, and that would be hilarious.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how it came about,
Yeah.
And I was really surprised at how much traction the band got. I thought it was like a novelty. Obviously we worked really hard on it and tried to make it really good, but I just really underestimated the potential demand for what we were doing.
Yeah, because I remember seeing you all like about last year. I went up to South Carolina to see you with Obituary, and it was a great show. And I've been a fan of you all for years, and seeing you all play, it was fucking awesome.
Oh, thanks, man. That's so cool.
Cool. And yeah, tell me about the full length album, Dimension of Horrors, or the EP. Like, I love this album. Tell me about like making this.
Well, we kind of, the first record is sort of an amalgam of the first three Death albums, and it kind of lands on Leprosy sort of by default. But when we did it, I didn't really have an idea that Gruesome was going to be a going concern. So I just sort of threw everything at the wall. And then once the band, got legs, I was like, shit, well, what are we going to do now? And we sort of streamlined the concept a little bit to sort of narrowing our focus and zeroing in on like one album at a time. And so Dimensions kind of became our Scream Bloody Gore or whatever. And just like Twisted Prayers then sort of became our Spiritual Healing or whatever. And the next record that we're working on, that we're sort of knee deep in,
will be
right
The
now,
Human.
Yes. So that's one of the reasons why it's taken so long, is because it's more technical music, it's more involved, it's more demanding, and everybody is like so fucking busy with a million things. So it's just a really slow process.
Yeah, and then kind of going into the next EP, Fragments of Psych. I love that EP. Like, I feel like 2017 you had like a lot of stuff, but tell me about like that EP.
That came from Sean Reinert had just left Cynic. I'm not exactly sure what the situation was, but he was kind of he had some health problems and he was coming back from them, and he's like, I just want to do something. And like I said, Gus and him were really good friends, and Gus is like, why don't you play on one of our tracks? And he's like, sure, fuck yeah, I'll do it. And I was like, wait, what? Sean Reinert's gonna play on a Gruesome song? Like, why would he do that? I knew Sean, he was a friend, he was a lovely guy and everything, but I was like, really? He wants to do, okay, shit. So I put together a track that was like my attempt to do like a human track for him, because I mean, that's what, if you're going to do a song with Sean Reinert, that's what you want to do, right? And so that was just a surreal moment as a fan, like, holy fuck, I can't believe Sean played on one of our songs. And it's really cool that Gus is, has the humility to step aside and be like, no, Sean should play in my band, not me, because he's the guy. Yeah. And so that was just really, that was the impetus behind that. We had the opportunity to work with Sean Reinert, so we weren't going to be like, well, we're not going to do Human yet. It's like, no, we're doing this. It's Sean Reinert. Fuck yeah.
Yeah, it's Sean Reinert. Don't question that. He is a legend. Rest in peace.
Yep.
Yes.
And when Sean Reinert asks you for something, you say yes.
Yes. I mean, nothing against Gus. I mean, he's a great guy. I actually interviewed him at that Spartanburg show that I mentioned I was at.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then kind of also in 2017, I know you also started up Pounder, and you did the Heavy Metal Disaster demo and other stuff. Tell me about like Pounder, because nobody talks about that.
That was an idea that had been percolating forever. That had been percolating since like the early 2000s, like whatever, 2004, maybe 2005. Like I said, in like 94, 95, I just started slowly kind of moving backwards. And, by the time about 2000 rolled around, I was really into, Tank and Diamond Head and Angel Witch and Tigers of Pantang and Priest, Maiden, Accept, uh, Motorhead, like whatever else, and that only kind of deepened, as time goes on or went on. Because I mean, anybody that goes down that rabbit hole, it's like endless. You start with Maiden, and then you turn around and you're like listening to like Aragorn and fucking Chateau and Heavy Load and White Spirit, and like there's just infinite like European metal, especially British metal from like 78 to like 84. And so I just kept listening to more and more and more of it. And I became friends with Jarvis from Night Demon. And I told him, like, oh, I have these riffs and I have these songs. And he's like, you should do it, man. And I was like, yeah, but I can't find a singer. And he's like, just do it. And I ended up meeting our guitar player, Tom, who's a British guy who moved over to California with his wife. And he had been playing an Angel Witch after Bill from Carcass left because Carcass was getting really busy again. Anyway, obviously, Tom is a phenomenal guitar player. And I was like, well, shit, I have a chance to do a record with this guy. Because our bass player, Alejandro, and I had been talking about doing this for years. And once Tom came on, I was like, fuck it, here's the dude. We have a chance to make a record with him. Let's do it. And I'll just sing and, whatever. It's going to come out how it comes out. And so that was kind of how that started.
Yeah. And then I know you also did the Nightmare Future EP by Expulsion, which I think is a pretty solid EP. Listen to that earlier. That's just like fucking grinding. I think so far, is there any other plans to do more with that band?
That really was Matt Olivo from Repulsion's thing. He wrote all the music. I just wrote the lyrics. And just did the vocals. I didn't even know that the vocals were going to be the final vocals. I thought they were just going to be the vocals for the demo when I recorded them. But they ended up just using them anyway. So I just kind of left it all up to Matt Olivo. And, I have no idea of what he's doing because I ended up just sort of bowing out of the thing because there was not much going on. And it seemed like every time that Matt wanted to do something, which was like, 3 times in 3 years, I had a schedule conflict, and I was like, this is silly. Love you, but you should find somebody else, because if you want to do something with this, all I'm doing is getting in the way of that. And so, but Repulsion's one of my favorite bands, and I played in Repulsion after Exhumed split up for a few years, which was really fun. Which is why, obviously, Matt Olivo came back and talked to me about doing this. I thought the record was great. I fucking love it. But it's just, nothing was happening, and I was too busy. And so I don't even know if there are any plans to do anything. I have no idea at this point. Yeah. So I know Matt has a very busy career and all that kind of stuff.
And all right, and then also last thing for 2017, you did Death Revenge by Exhumed. Dude, I love this album. Tell me about like this.
It wasn't like all this stuff started in 2017. It just seemed like a bunch of stuff that had been percolating for a long time kind of came to a head in that year. But Death Revenge was a real undertaking, no pun intended. I stumbled upon the story of the Birkenhair murders, the Anatomy murders in Scotland. And I was thinking, like, what haven't we done? It's like, this was going to be our 6th record, I guess. And I was just trying to think, like, how do you find something? Obviously, we're still playing death metal. It still sounds like Exhumed, but I'm like, how do you find something that we haven't done and that, hasn't been done to death? And the story kind of presented itself. I stumbled on it, and I was like, this is, if we were ever going to do a concept album, this is what it would be about. And, so it was just a bunch of different stuff. We brought in our old bass player, Matt Widener, who helped me put together all the intros and the interludes on the album. And then Ross, we had re-recorded Gore Metal with Ross. And so Ross and I were talking a lot. And Rob ended up getting fired just because he was blowing it as far as just partying too hard. Or at least like the partying was getting in the way of just doing what we're supposed to be doing. And anyway, so it was just kind of a good timing for Ross to come back, because he'd worked on the Impaled concept record, and he's deeply involved with a bunch of the ghoul stuff, which is all highly conceptual. So I started asking him for advice about how to do it anyway. And the more we talked, it was like, oh, I think he wants to like get involved, like for real. And so we got Ross back in the band then, which was really cool. And yeah, it was a real fucking undertaking though. Like doing tons of research, about the history of all this shit that happened, and arranging the intros and writing the songs, and coordinating everybody. It was an intense record to put together.
Yeah. Then going into 2018, you did the latest Gruesome album, Twisted Prayers. I loved this album. So tell me about that. I think you were kind of harping like this is kind of like your spiritual healing in a way.
Yeah, we worked really hard on that one. We had Jared Pritchard, who's been our engineer the whole time. He tracked down Scott Burns and got on the phone with him and talked to him for like a couple hours about what they did recording spiritual healing, what kind of mics they used, what kind of you know outboard gear they used, and all this stuff. And we really did a lot of research just on sonically how that record was put together. And I think when I got the album back, the first thing I did was listen to Spiritual Healing front to back, and then listen to our record front to back. And I was like, holy shit, this really sounds, it's really fucking similar. It could be like a B session almost. It sounds like, Chuck had a cold when he was doing the vocals or whatever for this, for the Twisted Prayers section. And so it was a really, really fun process. It was a lot of work, and it was something that we really delved into really intensely. And I'm really happy with the way the record came out. Spiritual Healing was a watershed moment for me as a kid. I was like 14 when that album came out, and I was just getting okay enough at guitar that I could kind of learn the riffs. So I just remember that whole spring of 1990, just in my bedroom, like obsessing over every single riff and trying to figure out how to play it, and playing along to that cassette tape over and over and over and over. So that was a big kind of moment for me, and I learned a lot from that record. And I remember even in the run up to making it, I was like talking with Terry. I was like, so what were you guys doing? Like, what were you listening to? Like, where were the lyrics coming from, and all this stuff. So it was really a privilege to sort of, get to pick his brain as we're like doing a tribute to that album, because that was a massive record for me as a kid.
Yeah, and being as it has been 5 years since Twisted Prayers, I think I interviewed Gus at the South Carolina show last year. I think you all always have how's the status with the next Gruesome album? I heard it's supposed to be out this year or something.
I mean, that was the goal, but I think the goal now is to record it this year. We're really, it's difficult because Dan is really busy with Possessed, and I'm really busy with a bunch of different stuff. And basically our process is I'm kind of putting together the sketch of the song, and then Dan is putting together like the finished demos of the song. And I mean, no disrespect to Dan, he works a lot more slowly than me. He's much more meticulous than I am. I mean, I think I could say most songwriters work much more slowly than I do. I really am like a firm believer in like first thought, best thought. It's like, okay, done, cool. Like, and usually my first sketch or whatever is about, 80 to 90% there anyway. But Dan is really putting in the extra work on these songs to make sure that they're not repetitive, to make sure that they're really concise and punchy the way Human is. And the demos that we have in place I'm really impressed with. Like, I feel weird saying that about my own band, but because it's a tribute to death, I feel less weird about it because it's not as much like my stuff. But I think it's going to be worth the wait, because I'm really excited about what we have so far, and we're close to being ready to record. We're getting there.
Nice. And then kind of going into 2018, 19, I know with Pounder, I know you did the Faster Stir That Blah, 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 I can't even talk
Oh yeah,
today.
the Faster Than Fire EP.
Faster Than
Yeah.
Fire EP, and then I know you did the Uncivilized full length. Tell me about like making those albums.
The main thing with those records and really the whole thing with Pounder has always been we've never really had a drummer.
Kind of,
Faster
kind
Than Fire we did with
yeah, kind of like you're like the death metal or metal Spinal Tap in a way.
yes, that we've joked about that many times. So we did the Faster Than Fire EP with my friend Carlos from North Carolina, who's sadly no longer with us. And then we had Gus from Gruesome because he's a session guy. That's what he does for a living. He did the drums on Uncivilized, and then we were doing some shows, and we've had all kinds of different friends of ours like fill in and stuff. Um, but really with that band, it's always so much more about the guitars and the melodies and all that kind of stuff than it is about the drumming. So we were able to kind of get away with
Yeah.
it. But yeah, we had a lot of fun. We did a lot of the Uncivilized stuff, a lot of all this stuff. Really, we did ourselves. Which was really cool.
Yeah, and then I know also 2019 you did the last Exhumed album, Horror. I love this album, one of my favorite albums from 2019. Tell me about like this album.
Well, the big thing with that album really is that we were talking about what we wanted to do going forward, and we had brought in Bud had left, and we brought in our guitar player Sebastian, and we were, we were just kind of talking about the future and what we wanted to do, and we were we were looking at we'd already been printing our own shirts and stuff, and we ended up moving into the building that I'm sitting in right now, and we were looking at how much it was going to cost to do a record and all this and that, and the calculation was, if we spent a little bit more, we could just basically build out our own recording studio here and make our own records. And so, most of my memories about making the record are about like putting up drywall and shit like that, rather than like doing guitar tracks or whatever. But we felt like we did Death Revenge, and it was really kind of ornate, and it had all these kind of cinematic elements and all this stuff. And we really went as far as we could in that direction. So we wanted to pull everything back with horror. And, I always think of music. I always make a lot of comparisons like pizza or food or whatever. And so Death Revenge is like a combination pizza. It's got everything on it, artichoke hearts and mushrooms and ham and bacon and this and that. And I was like, whereas horror is more just like just a pepperoni pizza. That's it. Like
Yeah.
nothing fancy, just totally plain and simple.
Yeah.
And the measure of a good pizza place is if they have a good pepperoni pizza, then it's good pizza. Because you can put a bunch of good tasting toppings on shitty pizza, and it's like, oh, this is pretty good. But if it's pepperoni, you can't get away with shit. It's got to be good cheese, it's got to be good dough, good sauce. And so we wanted to make sure that we had we were going back to basics and really focusing on making an album with as little things going on as possible, but still trying to make it compelling and interesting.
Yeah, and then going into 2021, I know you did the last Pounder album, Breaking the World, and it's with Scarecrow, the Raised the Death's Head EP. Tell me about like those releases.
We were working on Breaking the World during the pandemic, which was, good for everybody to have something to work on. The thing I think that I'm happiest with on that album is that on the first album I was learning how to write vocal melodies, and on the second album I was learning how to write vocal melodies that I could actually sing. Because you can write a great melody, but if you're not Rob Halford or Bruce Dickinson or these guys or Kai Hansen or whatever, sometimes it's hard to fucking sing. So I was really figuring out my limitations as a vocalist and trying to write to my strengths rather than just pushing myself. The first album, I'm like, no, like at the very top of where I can possibly sing the whole time. And, if you ever want to reproduce that live, that's going to be difficult. So I think the second record, it sounds better. It's got a better vocal performance, and it has like a couple of songs I think are, some of the best songs I've written, like period. So I'm really proud of the record. And I love the album cover, and it's just like the whole thing. It's pretty sick. Um, and then with Scarecrow, like I said, we'd played a bunch, we'd gigged a ton, and we'd written all these songs that we never recorded. And then right at the beginning of the pandemic, Will was doing that tour with Testament and Exodus in Europe, and everybody got really sick with COVID. The tour ended up getting canceled, and they came home, and Will was in a fucking coma. And we'd remained friends forever, and we'd always talked about like, oh, we should go back and record all those songs. And I kind of realized, thank God he made it out of the coma and everything else. But I just sort of realized, like, time is not unlimited. You turn around and it's 5 years later, and then you turn around and eventually at some point you turn around and you're like, holy shit, I'm like 60.
Yeah.
I have a bit of time before that now, but it was kind of like, we're still here. Thank God Will's still here, after what he went through with the illness and the coma and everything. So we should take advantage of that. Let's not take that for granted. Let's get back together and do these songs. And we're working on a full length. And the real, I think, challenge isn't even going to be the material. It's going to be finding a time when he and I aren't super busy, and then coordinating the album to come out so we can actually like play a bunch of shows and do something with it. Because we did the EP again during the pandemic, and it was kind of like, well, shit, now it's out. It was like, fuck, now I'm super busy. Fuck, now I'm super busy.
Yeah.
So trying to find some time to do that.
Yeah, and I know also in 21, 22, you did some more death tribute bands. You did Living Monstrosity and Left to Die, which I think was great. And I had the opportunity to see Left to Die at Boggs in Atlanta last year, so that was great. I thought that was like that was like the closest I was gonna get to seeing Death live. So tell me about like playing those shows with those bands.
It was Living Monstrosity. There was something that death fans put together, and originally I had a schedule conflict, and Max Phelps, who does Death to All, Max is fucking amazing.
Yeah, he's like Chuck Schuldiner reincarnated. I feel like it's kind of scary,
dude. And he's like the perfect guy to play all that later material. Like that's stuff that is would be really difficult for me to pull off, and he makes it look easy. So he was going to do it, but then I didn't have a schedule conflict. And I've known James. James engineered gore metal. That's how long I've known James. And obviously, I've known Terry for a long time at this point as well. And, Gus and I playing Gruesome together. So once I became available, they're like, well, actually, we're going to have Matt do it, which was really like flattering. The idea that Terry and James were like, no, we should get him. I was like, oh, you guys. So that was really fun, like getting to jam with James, who was like a huge influence on me. One of my heroes is a guitar player in high school. And again, getting to play the Spiritual Healing, which was a record that was so near and dear to my heart. That was really nice. And then from out of that, Rick became aware of the Living Monstrosity thing, which was always designed to be a one-off kind of deal. It wasn't like a project or whatever. And Rick was like, wow, Matt and Gus really were delivering. Like, you think, he hit up Terry and he's like, you think those guys would want to do Leprosy? And of course we're like, yes, of course we would.
Yeah.
And so, we got talking about how we would want to do it and how it would work. And so that's how we sort of came up with Left to Die and whatever. And we did the American tour, and then we went to Europe last year, or actually earlier this year, which was insane. And then we're working on the rest of the states. Again, there will be an announcement very soon about that. And we're going back to Europe next year. And it's just like, okay, I didn't plan on it. I wasn't looking for it, but I'm very happy to be doing it. And,
right.
My thing is that, I just want to help Rick and Terry play the songs and, have the audience deliver it to the audience in the best way that we possibly can, and just do justice to the material,
All right. And then the last thing is the last Exhumed album, To the Dead, one of my favorite albums from last year. So how do you feel about the album, and how's the reception been like?
I like this record a lot. I mean, obviously, I'm supposed to say that or whatever. And I like all of our records to varying degrees, but I like this one a lot because we had a lot of fun making it. We were recording during the pandemic. We knew that there was no hurry to put it out. We're in our own studio, on our own schedule, on our own timeline, especially because half the world is like not even open or functioning while we were making it. So we got to really just, not worry about time restrictions, not worry about budget, and just make the record the way we wanted. And we, because of all these anniversaries that we've been talking about throughout our conversation, we were realizing like, fuck, there's there's a lot to celebrate, at this point. And so we got Leon Del Muerte and Matt Widener and Bud Burke and Mike Beams. Mike played guitar on the first 3 records and was a very crucial element of that lineup in that era of the band. So we got them involved, when we were working on side 2, and we really took our time to make a record. I wanted it to be really sonically ugly and grimy and not nice, and I think that we achieved that, and in a way that, but it's still listenable and like you can discern what's going on. So I'm really happy with how it came out, and I think it's a really it's a neat representation of the history of the band. And I don't know of any other band that has gone back and said, hey, former members, would you like to like write a song with us for the new album? I think that's something that was pretty novel. And it was just, again, it was something because the pandemic, we just had all this time to like talk about what we wanted to do, and there was no pressure because usually we're on tour and we're doing 50 million things. So it was nice to be able to make a record without all that.
Yeah, and it seems like a good balance of like the grossness and the musicality, since you guys have like more chops than when you made those like those older albums like Gore Metal and so on.
Awesome. Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, that's exactly what we were going for. It's like trying to, it's one of those weird things that like, when you're a rudimentary player, you can kind of just catch lightning in a bottle. Because there's all this energy and you this sort of willingness to just go and do stuff. And it becomes more difficult the better you get at your instrument and the more savvy you are about production and so on and so forth. And, how do you make something that is genuinely capturing that same vibe, not just regurgitating the same stuff and not being so contrived that it's, the audience can tell when it's contrived, I certainly can. And so that was really what we were trying to balance on that record. And I feel good about what we did, and people seem to like it. So, hopefully we did okay. You liked it. So, hey.
Yeah, definitely.
There's one.
Yeah, and I know you've been in a lot of bands like going from Exhumed to Gruesome to Decapitator. What is sort of like the mind frame with all your bands? Is there like a usual like game plan, or is there plan with all the projects are you in, or do you try to like stick with like a different like mindset depending on each band?
I try to have a different mindset with each band, but at the same time, I kind of have universal ideas about music. Like, to me, a good song is a good song, and it could be, by Martha and the Vandellas or Chic or Mahavishnu Orchestra or Sore Throat or whatever. Like, regardless of genre, I listen to all kinds of music, and I think that a good song is a good song. Something that has a hook, something that's memorable, something that has replay value, but is also instantly gratifying. Something that grabs you and then has depth to kind of like keep you listening and keep you coming back. So, in some ways, the approach is the exact same, but in many ways, the approach is completely different with every band, and it's all about compartmentalizing. And it sounds super nerdy, but like compartmentalizing is fun for me. I think about like, what is it I like about X subgenre? Cool. So let's kind of put these limitations around what we're doing that encompass what I like about this, and then see what I can do there. And then let's go over here and think about, this other subgenre and kind of what is it that I like about that, and then try to work within there. And then everybody else in the bands, brings their own thing. And then, I tend to be like the main songwriter or editor. And so I kind of, rough it out, and then everybody fills in everything else, and then we kind of agree on something to finish. So it's, again, every band is different, but every band is the same, you know.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you know, as long as it's something that I like and I think is compelling and fun, then I'm into it. You know.
awesome. And I got one more question for you. And I kind of like to talk about like your gear because I think you have like a sick guitar tone. So I'm always curious, like what kind of guitars you play, like strings, pedals, amps, and all that good stuff.
Um, you know, my philosophy for a long time um, is that, you know, obviously gear is fun, and you know, I'm not super into gear like a lot of people, but you know, guitars are cool and shit. But I also think that if you're playing well and the material's strong, that's more important than the gear. Like a great guitar player could pick up a fucking, you know, Squire Strat and like do something cool with it. Um, so, you know, really, it's a pretty basic setup. I use my live amp is just a PV 6505 plus because it's got, you know, it's adjacent to like a higher end, you know, like a Powerball or EVH or whatever, but it's more affordable, and it's something that if it breaks and dies, like I would be sad, but I wouldn't like cry. Like if I had a, you know, a JCM 800 that was 30 years old and it blew up on tour, I would be devastated. um, so it's just it's a good workman-like amp. It sounds good. It's flexible, and I work with a guy named Michael Klein that builds all our effects pedals. My drive pedal it's called a Slimer, but it's very much in the Tube Screamer sort of tradition. It doesn't have as narrow of a like a high mid with that nasal sound that Tube Screamer gets, but it's the same kind of drive that a Tube Screamer provides, and that's really it. And then my leads, I just use another pedal that Michael Klein designed. It's called Lonely Ghost. It just does delay, reverb, and volume boost. Um, and that's it. And then on the records, I'll use different amps. You know, like the records you're going for a more specific sound, and then you're not worried about the PA of the club and the blah 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 and all this shit. So then you have time to dig around. You know, I'm doing all the gruesome demos with a Marshall valve state because that's what Chuck used starting on either human or individual thought patterns. That's what he always used. And the Randall E150 from Spiritual is like an older amp that's kind of hard to find. Dan Gonzalez has one, but I don't have one. You know, but I try to keep it really simple, you know. And then I just have a chorus pedal that Michael Klein designed after the Boss CE2. It's called Bedroom Eyes because it's very sexy, and it's pink, which I love. I use that for like my clean stuff in Scarecrow. It's got that sort of chime, you know, like so out of tune that it's in tune, which is what you want in a good chorus. Um, and then everything else is just sort of as and when I need something. Like I have an old Maxon phaser if I need a phaser for some of the death stuff or, you know, some of the gruesome stuff. But I really try to keep it as minimal as possible. I just use Ernie Ball strings, just the kind you can get in any Guitar Center. Um, I have like, you know, we make our own custom picks, but it's just a green Tortex gauge. Like you can get it any fucking guitar store anywhere. Ernie Ball's green Tortex. That's it. Um, I I've been working with ESP for years now. I love their fucking guitars. Their LTDs, the higher end of the LTDs, I use all the time, and they're some of the best guitars I've ever owned. Even though they're their budget line, the E2s are a little bit better. Like, but the LTDs, like if you get a fucking LTD Deluxe, anything, that's a great guitar, great hardware, stays in tune, goes on tour, fucking takes a beating, keeps playing, great guitars. Seymour Duncan Blackouts for B, I use the original Blackouts, and then in D, I use the Mick Thompson set because it's a little more in that EMG 81 kind of range, but it's not so smushed into one thing, which is, you know, the EMG complaint forever that everyone's had. You know, everybody used EMG 81s forever. They're great pickups, but they do one thing only, whereas the Blackouts have a little bit more flexibility, a little bit lower noise. And that's, you know, and I have a noise suppressor that I always use live.
Awesome.
So my Exhumed board is tuner, it's wireless tuner, driver, noise suppressor, and delay, boost, reverb pedal. So that's it, 5 things. The
Yeah.
Gruesome board has a phaser on it. That's it.
Yeah, just less is best.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, if you not that I'm a great guitar player, but I'm an okay guitar player, and I'm pretty decent at doing what I'm trying to do. There's tons of stuff I wish I could do, but like, and it's like cool. Well, if I'm not playing good, then you can put all this shit, all this fancy stuff, and it might mask it a little bit. But like, if you're playing well and the material's good, you don't need a bunch of fancy stuff to put it across.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. So before we go, Matt, I just want to thank you for this conversation. Great to be able to talk with you today. There's just anything else with the Exhumed or Gruesome or any of your other projects that you'd like to promote?
Uh, I mean, we have um, our web store, which is our darker corners dot my shopify.com. I'll send you the link where you can get exclusive shirts and records and things like that that are not for sale via the label and such. Um, and Exhumed will be on tour for 6 weeks throughout the United States, supporting the Cavaleras on their Morbid Devastation tour. Super excited about that. Super excited to get out and hopefully play in front of some new people and get to hear classic Sepultura songs every night, played the right way. So,
Yes.
please come out to a show if you're so inclined. We'd love to see you. And there's going to be loads more Left to Die, Exhumed, Gruesome stuff being announced in the next few months. So, keep your ears out for that, and we'll see you soon.
Awesome. So everybody, Matt Harvey from Exhumed and Gruesome. We'll see you next time.